Good evening and welcome to Perigo. I'm Lindsay Perigo and I'm dangerous. Perigo is Portuguese for danger, and I want to be that to the enemies of reason, freedom and excellence. Tonight, the child molesters of the mind who infest the state education system. A few weeks back, my attention was caught by this headline on Stuff. 3 R's too much for some teachers. Some teachers are so lacking in literacy and numeracy skills that they cannot write adequate reports or do primary school level maths, according to the story. Anecdotal evidence from principals includes teachers having poor reading comprehension, making basic punctuation, grammar and spelling errors, and being unable to help pupils reading. No one should be surprised then that the NZQA criteria for NCEA unit standards specify that any spelling, punctuation and/or grammar errors that do not appreciably affect the intended message do not matter. The education system all over the West has for decades been in the hands of state worshippers intent on making everyone equally dumb and willing to do as the state demands, a fact brilliantly dramatised by the late Kurt Vonnegut in his short story Harrison Bergeron, where those displaying excess intelligence are zapped by special headphones at the behest of the Handicapper General. In New Zealand, our Handicappers General are the Ministry of Education, the NZQA, the NRO and the teacher unions. The unions, as we know, have been resisting tooth and nail the introduction of national standards of literacy and numeracy. Why allow pupils to attain standards they themselves cannot? The tools of the handicappers are things like the NCEA, with its gibberish criteria that tell potential employers nothing. Weasel words and sticky platitudes like innovative, creative, across a range of, are the handicappers' stock in trade. Here's the ERO praising a particular school. Cooperative, interactive class activities such as well-structured and scaffolded group activities reinforce independent thinking. Scaffolded group activities? What the hell are they? It's all bollocks, of course, this mushy gibberish, and its objective is the exact opposite of independent thinking. Its objective is mindless conformity, and it has been achieved in generations ahead. Gormless, incoherent, addicted to instant gratification, and above all, willing serfs of the state. And that's just the teachers. The handicappers have done their job. One of their principal tools for decades has been the look-say method of teaching reading. My guest tonight has fought a heartwarming battle against this crippling abomination. I hope his story will inspire you. Right now, I want to put on record again my view that the state should not be involved in education at all. Our friend Plato here believed that the state should separate children from their parents at birth and regulate every aspect of a child's upbringing. 2,500 years of this sort of thing, as the government extends its tentacles more and more deeply into early childhood education. If generations ahead don't persuade you that Plato was wrong, I don't know what will. That's the Peritorial, back with tonight's guest in a moment. Welcome back to Perigo and welcome to my guest this week, Graham Crawshaw, literacy campaigner, director of Windy Ridge Boys Farm. Welcome along, Graham.
Thank you, Lindsay.
What's that, first of all, the Windy Ridge Boys Farm?
Windy Ridge Boys Farm was an environment to give boys back their stolen boyhood and create an environment for teaching them literacy. So we target boys who are illiterate, and girls too, of course, but we find that for every girl who's missed out on learning to read or becoming literate, there are about 10 boys. That's about the percentage. So Windy Ridge Boys Farm, boys are at home straight away. We say, welcome back to 1900. We have no technology, no cell phones, nothing like that.
Seriously?
Absolutely.
No cell phone?
No, but we do have pets. We do have pet pigs and dogs and cats and trees to climb, fires to light, dams to make, eels to catch, glowworms to look at, and so huts to build. So we give boys back their stolen boyhood.
But no cell phone
no
to
cell
text
phones.
on?
The only cell phone we allow is if a leader goes out with a group of boys in the bush and may need to make an emergency call. That's the only allowance we make for technology.
So when you talk about stolen boyhood, explain that to me.
Well, my own boyhood was luxurious in every way. I had parents who loved each other, and they gave me a fantastic boyhood, initially in a quarter-acre section on Mount Eden, on the corner of Belmont Road and Penryn Road. I kept ducks and rabbits and homing pigeons, shot rats in the neighbour's chook yard, grew things, got to know all the neighbours and people within a mile, so I had a wonderful boyhood. Not only that, from the age of 6, I went and stayed on farms, friends and relatives of my parents, by myself. And I stayed on 35 farms altogether. And that was my education. I did attend school, that was largely a waste of time. I was bullied at school anyway.
You never let schooling interfere with your education.
I didn't. I'm like Mark Twain, that's right. I did not let school interfere with my education.
But your position is that currently, the current generation of boys, young men, are deprived of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks to, well, I know OSH need to do some regulations, but thanks to a lot of regulations and the absence of farms, the style of the ones I stayed on, you know, highly technological farms with 600 cows and so on, no place for boys. And so there are very few places. So we thought we'd create one at Windy Ridge. And it's in early stages yet, it's in embryonic stages, but as time goes on we hope to make it a model place for boys and also a model for a franchise. We'd like to franchise that. One father who sent his children to our reading camps at Arapahu, he said, we need 24 of your outfits throughout New Zealand. Windy Ridge is relatively cheap to establish. We have no electricity and the everything is semi-dilapidated and very boy-friendly, they can't damage. And so we'd like to create a place where boys, and girls too, don't get me wrong, can have their boyhood restored.
So it sounds rather like an even more austere version of Outward Bound.
It is in some ways, and we do have, obviously we have to have parameters for their safety, and the safety of material, but we try to give them as much freedom as we can. For example, in the environment at Windy Ridge, we've established one area is little work benches where they can work in wood. We had a boy at one of our farm stays there, and his father just died. He was angry with everybody. He was angry with anyone in authority. We put him in there with a bench and a vice and a hammer and a saw, and he was happy as Larry. I said, Jason, have you got a hammer and saw at home? No. So people have been very generous to us, and our aim is to be able to send boys home with a hammer and a saw of their own.
I was reading a case recently where some boys built a tree house. It was actually on council property, so the council had the right to do what they did, which is, as you would guess, demand the removal of the tree houses because they didn't meet safety specifications. So you do have to be concerned up to a point, don't you? A rational concern.
Absolutely. We consider that our activities are relatively low risk. We don't do anything complicated like abseiling or kayaking, things that have a higher risk factor and need more, more equipment, safety equipment. So if you look, there's 108 things, there's a list I've made on the wall that boys may do while they're at Windy Ridge Boys Farm.
Oh, well, I suppose OSH have given you a list of 1,008 things they may not do.
OSH have been very generous to me in interpreting. I rang them once from Arapahu and said a girl had fallen off a vine, hurt her back. I said, oh, I need to close this camp, it's too dangerous. Oh no, Mr. Crawshaw, you haven't killed anybody yet? And I said, but hang on a minute, there's all these trees. You'd like me to cut all the trees down and put the whole place in sponge rubber? Well, we're not like that, Mr. Crawshaw. Oh yes, you are. But I actually have a good relationship with them, really. But I'm very aware of our responsibility. And we only have to have one fatality or a serious accident when, like the rooster, we're a rooster one day and a feather duster the next.
But Arapahu, you began way back in 1962.
Correct.
And the main thrust of that was not just these life skills, but reading. because there was already a problem emerging with illiteracy.
Exactly. We didn't really start on that. We did have a private school operating from 78 to 82 where we had an excellent reading program based on phonics. It wasn't until 1991 we had 42 boys at our normal character building camp and we tested their reading. I had an excellent teacher and I was amazed at the poor literacy of the 10 worst. And what amazed me was that they cut right across wealth and ethnicity. They were simply boys from a background that, and so we threw phonics at them and they loved it. Why aren't we taught this way at school? And, oh, forget the mudslide, give us some more phonics because we make it such fun. And of course they make such quick progress with the block building we do.
Just so that we're clear about our terms before we go too much further, phonics and luxay, can you briefly describe what each of those is?
Well, I'm familiar with phonics, certainly. You take the word cat. There are 3 letters in cat, and the names of those 3 letters are C, A, T. But the sounds of those letters don't make meow, as some people say. They make K, A, T. K, A, T is cat. Those are the phonic derivations of those 3 letters. I rather not comment on luxay, except as to try to memorise a picture of a cat and say, oh, that's his cat. Of course, an extreme example is the word elephant that you mentioned before, which I think is so absurd. Sure, a person will know that says elephant, but is that the way to learn? Any alphabet-based language needs to be learned phonically. Phonics started about 1500 BC, and right up to the 1950s, roundabout, it was the way any alphabet-based language was taught. With English, about 87% of words can be taught with a phonic base or basic rule.
But they were in that predicament because of the use of the luxay method in schools at the time. And the rationale for luxay is, oh, it makes it fun. We have a picture of an elephant and the word elephant and mix the two together. Oh, that's how you spell elephant. And you're supposed to remember, vaguely, those sounds for the next word that you come across. Of course that's not going to work because it's guesswork. But that's what was causing the problem that you encountered.
Well, absolutely, because with a luxay word you can memorise, say, up to 400 words. And that's about it, you see. The beauty of phonics, that it's unlimited, because you learn to break down an unfamiliar word, desyllabise it, and then put it together.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
It's simply matching the letter to the sound.
Exactly.
And I was saying to you before we went on camera, I don't remember learning to read, but it must have been that way, because I certainly don't remember having to look at an elephant and then at the word and so on. I think probably a lot of people don't remember how they were taught to read, but that the infestation of the system by luxay clearly is manifest in problems that we confront to this very day, and you're obviously still confronting. When did luxay get a hold?
Well, it was largely through the efforts of Clarence Beebe, who was appointed Director of Education under the Fraser government back in the early 1950s, I think, and he changed such a lot. In fact, he lived to regret it too. He corresponded with a friend of mine who's passed on, and at the end of his life he wrote a letter regretting the dramatic changes he made.
Is that so?
Yes, there was room for some changes, but nowhere near as radical as the ones he made.
And I suppose that the rationale was that it was going to make the learning of reading more fun and less draconian, because it is a difficult discipline to master for a child with a young brain just coming to grips with the world around him. And I suppose it was designed to just make the process less painful.
Well, I think it's more serious than that, really. I think we trace it back to John Dewey and his efforts in dumbing down the whole literacy, worldwide literacy.
So you don't think it was innocent?
I don't think it was innocent.
No. What in particular did Dewey say that would indicate to you that it was intentional?
Well, he didn't see the need for academic or learning of any great nature, that people should just enjoy life. I'm not all that familiar with him, but I know he did a lot of damage in my book.
He was the fellow, I think, who said learn by doing, which you're a great advocate of.
Well, I am, but I still think that the literacy needs to be learnt accurately, like the spelling and the pronunciation and the use of words. We have a lot of fun with adjectives, for instance. Of course, for a lot of the boys, their most familiar word is duck starting with F, And some of my staff complain and says, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's about a quarter of their vocab. Just ignore it." And so we make it a fun thing. And before long, they're starting to use words, not awesome or cool or wicked, you follow? We give them some proper adjectives
Cool,
and they love
awesome
it.
and wicked would have been the remaining
They're
three
all banned
quarters.
too. They're in the same category as duck, starting with F, yeah. But we don't make a lot of comment. We don't embarrass them. In fact, we create what I term an academically safe environment. So the boy that can't read, he suddenly feels at home. He's no longer called dumb and stupid, or my teacher says I'm a little shit and I'll never do anything with my life. We make it comfortable for them, but we find out where they're at and we move on from there.
So you really discovered by accident that there was this problem with
Yes,
literacy.
I did, because up to, as you said, we started in '62, and funnily enough, a lot of the boys said, "I wish I could go to school here." And we didn't do a lot with literacy, but we were particular in our conversation. And we did inspire the children to use, a wider range of vocabulary that they were familiar with. But certainly since we started the literacy program in 1995, we held our first reading camp, we called it then. We call them farm stays now, with the literacy is just a subtle introduction as well.
So then phonics became a major component of
Well,
what
it
you were
certainly
doing.
did, you see. Now it's a foundation, and a lot of schools claim to teach phonics, and when I look into it better, I see, well, hang on a minute. You've had this boy for 2 years and he's still not reading. He's still guessing. Our greatest difficulty is when the boys come to us to stop them guessing. Takes about 24 hours. Not to guess, we have to be very patient. Please do not guess. And so, but once they start in a small way with small words, like 3-letter words, each with one of the 5 short vowels, that's how the reading starts. We move up from there.
Did you encounter opposition from the education establishment? You obviously did.
Well, I'd like to tell you a quick story about 3 headmasters. One headmaster, he was headmaster from 1925 to 1950, and at that stage the proficiency exam was a level of academia, including the 3 R's. Children had to pass that before moving on to secondary school. All right, he'd have big boys, he'd say, I'd have big Maori boys, 13, even 14, still in the Stanton 6, but that's the number of failures he's had, 0. That was my dad. I only wished I'd talked to him more. Headmaster number 2, I showed him a camp form, phonics. How do you confuse kids with phonics? Get out of my office. So I got out of his office, and we had 2 boys from that school, and they came to our program at Arapahu, and they went home reading journals for the first time. They came back to another program with 2 more boys from that school, and we improved all their decoding skills. That's what term I like to use. And their parents found a school where phonics was taught properly. Headmaster number 3, and this is the best story of all. It's a local school here at Oraki, and the headmaster there asked me if I'd take some boys to teach them to read. I wasn't ready. 3 years later, I said, I'm ready now. He said, I haven't got any. What he had done, he'd got one of the top exponents of phonics, Professor Tom Nicholson, and he'd got them into his school, and he'd retrained every single teacher in his school. This should be headline news right through the country. It should happen in every school, every primary school. One child leaving primary school illiterate is one too many.
I remember interviewing Tom Nicholson, and I remember that he had encountered great opposition from the education establishment. And another person who did was Doris Ferry on the Kapiti Coast, who had remedial reading classes teaching phonics. She had a terrible time.
I know.
Now, you got to know her quite well.
Very well indeed. As I say, I'm in touch with her daughter, and Gaynor, and I've got access to her material if I need it, but she keeps me up to speed. Gaynor's strength is actually mathematics, but she's very familiar with Doris's methods. I mentioned earlier the 5 short vowels. In the books that we used up to the time that they were discarded in place of the Janet and John series, there it is in the first issue. I've got it. In the back page, there's a page each of the 5 short vowels. I speak at Rotary, and I've got this egg with a painted orange undies painted on it, and egg and orange undies. That's the 5 short vowels. And so they're taught, but phonics isn't mentioned there, but it's taught.
So which method is used most commonly now?
Well, I couldn't answer that properly, except there's a strong move to reintroduce phonics, and I'm strongly of the opinion that it needs to start there. Sadly, a lot of children it's left till a bit later on and done half-heartedly. I've got these in-your-face stamps. Any child passing its sixth birthday illiterate is a child at risk, and I mean that. It goes on my correspondence.
You see, we have this recent statement from the Education Minister saying there's about 150,000 kids failing in our education system every year. That's the Minister of Education saying there's about 150,000 kids.
Yeah.
An elementary grammatical error, but you wouldn't expect it from the Minister of Education, except in our contemporary times. But a lot of that must be due to illiteracy or inadequate literacy skills.
Because the tragedy is in many homes there are up to 3 generations of illiterates. So the parents don't have the skills to teach their children.
And the teachers certainly don't.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I don't want to think I'm anti-teacher. I'm just pro-literacy. And any child, I'd say, not reading by 6 or 7 at the outside, you need to pull out all the stops and see what's gone wrong. And so the issue of dyslexia was practically unknown when phonics was taught properly.
I thought that was an organic condition that would have nothing to do with
Well, it's interesting you should say that, but many, or even most children show some form of dyslexia when they start writing early. They don't need to write from left to right instead of right to left. They'll get their B's and D's wrong. So there needs to be a patient help from their parents, ideally, to show them the right way to do those letters. For instance, we'll draw a bed, B, E, D, and there's your B and D, you see, with someone lying on it. So it helps. We use plasticine and to get the letters right.
Clearly, there's going to be a demand for your services for some time to come. So you still have your work cut out, even though generations of results by now should tell us which method is right and which is wrong. You're now 80?
I'm in my 80th year. On the 4th month of my 80th year.
That means you're 79 years.
I'm 79 in 4 months.
And still going strong and intending to keep going strong.
Well, I enjoy life. I've just lived in luxury all my life. I've lived in the luxury of enjoying talking to strangers. My parents trained me in that. My greatest disappointments or tragedies were at 3 schools where I was attacked both verbally and physically and academically. I haven't had problems out in Civvy Street, but that's where I was abused, bullied at schools.
So going back to Mark Twain's statement about not letting schooling interfere with one's education, I've always been a great advocate of that too, and I was a dropout from university, partly because I was there doing music and we were getting all this postmodern stuff with the sounds of glass breaking and construction sites being passed off as music and so on and so forth. At that time I had no idea what postmodernism was, or that there was a whole philosophical corruption going on. So I think if one is to take anything out of the remarkable story of your life, it is to learn primarily from the school of life. Would you agree with that?
I'm in the University of Life. I'll never leave it. And it's so true. And you take my parents, they taught me economics. The word was never used. But when I went to save up for a farm, I realised I had it all behind my belt. Well, I actually lived in luxury in our house. I couldn't make out why we had such luxurious surroundings. You know, we had the Greek, all sorts of books, a whole range of them, the furniture, everything was luxury. And they recycled. And so I was taught economics at an early age to recycle, to make the most of everything. And so when I went to buy a farm, because I did start to train to be a dentist, and at the end of my first year of dental school, I sat on my parents' bed and said, I'm not going to be a dentist, I'm going to be a farmer. You know what they said? Go for it. But I greatly value the extension I had in learning, particularly at the university.
Well, look, Graham, thanks very much for coming in. All the best with Windy Ridge Boys Farm, and all the best with life. You clearly don't need it, but well, keep on keeping on.
Thank you very much indeed.
Graham Crawshaw, my guest today, and I'll come back with this week's romantic music gem in just a moment. My thanks again to Graham Crawshaw for being tonight's guest on Perigo. And so to this week's music gem from the Romantic era. courtesy of Marbex, who've kindly made a copy of this week's featured CD available for us to give away to you. To go into the draw and or comment on any aspect of our program, email me, linz@lindsayperigo.com. Linz, L-I-N-Z, at lindsayperigo.com. Now this is the CD. It's one I remember as a double LP album from my childhood, Joan Sutherland, Art of the Prima Donna. Originally released just after Sutherland attained phenomenal international fame, to show us what all the fuss was about. Here's the conclusion to the Bell song from Lakme. Till next time, for reason, freedom and excellence, I'm Lindsay Perigo. Good night.